Today marks the kickoff of the Asia Week New York 2018. We are proud to be a part of this big annual event, which I understand, at least according to the Asia Week's publications, is the world's premier destination for Asia art for collectors, curators, scholars, as well as enthusiasts. And I would put me in the amateur end of that whole spectrum. This evening, our gallery talk is titled Application of Hanji for Artistic Creations, Reflections on its Ecosystem and Sustainability. Our speaker, Professor Byun Kyung-hee, discusses the process of Hanji making with regards to sustainability of this Korean artisanal tradition. Dr. Byun also presents Ham Sup's unique art making with Hanji to emphasize his innovative processes that touch upon the cultural heritage of Korea. Before we begin with Professor Byun's lecture, I'd like to introduce Mr. Young Cho, our board member who played an important role, an indispensable role, I should say, in bringing this exhibit to the Korea Society. So, thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming. It's a great pleasure for the Korea Society and Boeringer Cultural Foundation to present works of Ham Sup here in New York City. The Korea Society and Boeringer Cultural Foundation were founded on the principles of cross-cultural exchange, dialogue. Just to look at Ham Sup's painting in the gallery, you will see exactly that, cross-cultural dialogue. His works stand at the intersection of culture and time, distinctly Eastern and traditional medium, but with reference to Western and contemporary style. Tonight, our speaker is Dr. Kyung-hee Pyun. Tom Byrne introduced about her. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Dr. Pyun.
Hello, everybody. Like you, I am also a bit disappointed that Mr. Ham couldn't be with us today. It's a great honor that I give you, a talk about Hanji, one of the greatest traditions of Korean culture, for the celebration of Asia Week. So today is the starting day of Asia Week, and then you can enjoy other activities throughout the week, and you can also go to Christie's or Sotheby's to see auctions of Asian artwork. So before I start my presentation, I'd like to show you a short video of Mr. Ham's studio. So, Peter, could you? Okay. So because he's speaking in Korean, we muted the tones, but this is Mr. Ham's studio in Chunchon. Chunchon is in Gangwon province, Gangwon-do, where Pyeongchang Olympic Games were held in February. So in his studio, as you can see, there are many scraps of papers, and you can see similar works in different sizes. And he spends a lot of time in his studio in Chunchon. So that's Mr. Ham. Because we edited a news interview. So here you can see a rack of different colors of paper, like Hanji. So Hanji comes in that type of like bundles, and then you hang it over. And then he can probably put a large canvas on top of the table and then create his artwork. So you can sort of envision how he created these works in his studio. So as far as I know, Mr. Ham studied this type of Hanji collage or Hanji abstract painting from 1980s. So in the presentation, we will talk more about his journey through abstract painting. So Peter, can we go to the next video? So this is how Hanji paper is being created.
We spot someone working on the roadside. He's busy cutting trees.
So this is in Chunchon,
Hello.
in Gyeongbuk province.
안녕하세요.
So he's cutting 닭나무, like it's a type of mulberry trees,
예, 이 나무가
paper mulberry
있는데요.
trees.
이 나무 껍질을 가지고 이제 한지 종류를 만드는 겁니다.
So he's going to use the bark
전통
of those
종류죠.
little twigs.
옛날 신라 때, 고려 때, 조선 시대 내려오면서 다 이 종류를 가지고 우리 조상들이 써왔던 종류죠.
The bark of paper mulberry trees is used to make paper. But how is paper made?
So usually they harvest these branches November or December, like winter time.
We asked the Hanji master to show us. The workshop is full of tubs and
So you
soaked
strip
paper
the
mulberry.
barks and then you put in the solution to make it a little bit loosened.
하나씩 요 보이죠? 예, 이것이 다 종이가 되는 겁니다.
So you can actually see that type of fiber placed on Mr. Ham's painting. He doesn't use, I mean, he uses the produced one, but also like a raw, like a gauze type of the trees as well. So this is how Hanji paper is made.
The moisture is removed slowly.
So you drain the water.
This process yields about 300 to 400 sheets of Hanji paper a day. It's understandable why Korean traditional paper is also called baekji, which means paper that requires 100 human touches.
Yeah, 백지 meaning 100. But this drying process is important. So I'm going to explain to you like, different types of drying.
장점이요. 그다음에 또 굉장히 오랫동안 보존할 수 있다는 겁니다. 예, 뭐 100년이 아니라 1000년을 가도 예, 좀이 예, 들지 않고 또 보존을 하면은 그 태가 그대로 종이가 사라져 있다는 거죠.
So you can create different types of crafts work with the Hanji.
Since ancient times, Hanji has been used to make all kinds of daily items because it's sturdy and can be stored for a long time. The gentle color and rough surface of Hanji are humble yet beautiful.
So can we go to the third video? In this video, I want you to pay attention to the screening like a method. There are three masters who are demonstrating traditional method. Like Jang Yong-hoon is designated as intangible cultural property of Hanji making.
About 200 sheets.
총 400장을
But it's 400 That's actually because 400. 200 is, two sheets into one.
It's called balji, like the screen is called webal. It's like a single, like a screen, and the way he twists is very important. It's another important master, Shin Hyun-se. So you do front and back, and then you do side to side, and there are reasons for those. And this is a kind of technique that you want to achieve like a perfection after many years of training. Okay, we can start. Okay, one more. Okay. 가평 is in 경기도. Okay, we can start presentation. Okay. So I want to start with the trees. The daknamu that you see above, that's the basis of Hanji paper. You need like a agricultural field to grow daknamu, and then in the sort of a winter time, like November or December, usually you are going to harvest those daknamu, and then harvest the bark area, and then you are going to create a paper. In English, daknamu is translated as like a paper mulberry trees, but it's not the mulberry trees that you see below. That is for silkworms. In order to cultivate silkworms, you need 뽕나무, not 당나무. And then 뽕나무's fruits you can eat, but 당나무's fruits only used for medicine. So to summarize the process, you strip the barks, and then as you can see in the number 4, that above picture, they are going to sort of beaten up to make it a little bit softened, and then you put in the water solution below, and then you are going to do there's a screening like a method, and the traditional one is called webar. Like you have only one strip string connected to the screen, and then you can move like a forward, backward, and then side to side. And the reason you repeat those many like a screening is you want to have layers of fibers. When I show you microscopic images, you can understand why you want to accumulate or build different fibers in different directions. And in Korean paper making, this drying process is very important, and it's called 도침. You can see the Chinese characters too. There are 2 methods. You can just apply physical force. So as you can see with big wooden timber, you can press it down so that it becomes a little bit, because it's a fibers, as you press down, it becomes thinner and thinner. And then another method is you use the heat. That's what you saw in the video as well. So these days they create like a big iron plate. It's just slightly heated so that you can also create heated paper. So this is actually the hot iron plate. So if you see the summaries of this, you need dry trees, and then you create this type of fiber, like barks. And in Mr. Ham's works, you can see that actually that fiber or bark itself is applied and pasted. And these days you can practice paper making, but the little girl who has like 2 handles and then creating the paper, this is a new method called the sangbal. So you need 2 strings or like 2 holders, and this is more ordinary or easier way to make paper. And according to scholars, the sangbal was introduced around 1900 by Japanese people. But traditional Hanji is usually created with webar. You have 1 string, and then you shake it, and that creates many layers of fiber. So this is what I meant by many fibers. Basically, it is like a cellulose fiber, and it looks like A, like many lines. So A is the traditional method. And then D, that you can see over here, D, this is our copy paper, like a modern pulp-based paper. So as you can see, number A, Hanji has all preserved well these fibers so that it's very resilient. So you can tear it, but still it's pretty durable. And then it's better than modern papers. So if you treat it with a different stimulation, in this case, if you use dry heat artificial aging, that's the modern process that they use with hot iron plate underneath. It transforms into a certain way. So A is the traditional Hanji webar. So it becomes a little bit sparse. If you go to the A7, it's after 5 days, after 6 days, after 7 days. So it is somewhat vulnerable to dry heat. But what you can see next slide is humid heat. This is more like our ondol, like a heated floor system. Or if you have hot iron charcoal go through. This is different from the modern method. So if you have a humid heat artificial aging process, the number A, the traditional Hanji, becomes very dense. A3 means after 30 days. So as time passes, actually, traditional Hanji preserves itself really well. It's very resilient, and that's why some of the Hanji are used as craft materials. So this twisted paper rope you will see in Mr. Ham's works as well. Do you see like a black lines as if this is a calligraphy brush on Mr. Ham's work? Those are usually created with jisung, twisted paper rope. So you can twist Hanji and then it becomes a very tight rope. So with this, people used to create like a vessels or crafts containers. So you can see the jisung like a pottery. It's not made of clay, actually. It's made of a paper rope. And then you could have made clothes. This type of like sort of a loose, like a screen, like a woven vests were worn under the rainy clothes during the summertime, so that clothes doesn't stick to your sweaty body. So paper was used for variety of purposes. So Mr. Ham is from Chunchon in Gangwon province. Traditionally, the famous place for Hanji making is Jeonju. Jeonju, you can see on the second line, Jeonju, because according to the Joseon dynasty's historical record, people in Jeonju provided official supplies of papers to the court. But Gangwon-do, Gangwon province, they were also known for creating excellent paper. So the tradition continues. So when we talk about the sort of a unique strength of Hanji in Korean history, it is usually found in the annals of Joseon dynasty. In Korean, it's called Joseon Wangjo Shillok. It's a royal chronicle of the Joseon dynasty. So why is it so special? You have to write down on a piece of paper, but this is for archival purpose, right? It's a history books. So the government wanted it to be preserved for several hundred years, if not 1,000 years. So according to scholars, papers used for these annals, the chronicle, were 12 sheets of Hanji, sort of pressed together using the dochim technique. So it's not your ordinary paper. It is a specially produced archive quality paper. So it's very strong. So even today, when you have a conservation project to preserve rare books, conservators across the world now use Hanji paper because of its strength. So going to Mr. Ham's work, is there anybody who have met Mr. Ham in person? I know some people. So maybe we can continue our conversation with Mr. Ham's friends. I have never met him. So it's a great honor to see actually his work in person. So his works are usually in this type of large canvas. And in the reproduction, it looks like a painted colors, but actually if you stand in front of it, you realize that every component has a tactile quality, right? Actually built upon layers, and all of those motifs were created with Hanji. So when I saw Mr. Ham's work, especially in his studios, it reminded me very much of Vasily Kandinsky, like a sort of a pioneer of abstract painting in the early 20th century, like black lines, vibrant colors. But the difference is Vasily Kandinsky's work is a traditional oil painting on canvas, while Mr. Ham actually created new material for his visual vocabulary. So originally, Mr. Ham, his name was Ham Jong-sup, but abbreviated to Ham Sup. And as you've read in some literature, he was very successful. I mean, probably is still successful in art market. With Park Young-deok Hwarang, he went to so many art fairs, and a lot of his works were actually well sold. So he was sort of a superstar at art fair. So these are typical representations. So the kind of component you see is raw fibers of daknamu, or you have a little bit more processed hanji, and then predominantly you are going to see old books, right? Like with written characters. Sometimes that's Hangul, like a Korean alphabet, most likely. Sometimes it's Chinese characters. So where do you think he got those characters or books? Well, I want to ask him where he got these books, but usually artists get old books and then reuse it for like a collage or other kind of representation. So in using hanji, there are different methods. Another important artist who uses hanji predominantly would be Jeon Kwang-young. He often has art exhibitions in New York City, and also very successful artist for art fairs and gallery area. So this is his work, Aggregation Series. So it looks like sort of built up geometric forms, sort of sculptural motifs placed on the canvas. But if you take a close look, each component is wrapped with old books. You can recognize some of the old Hangul or Chinese characters, and then sometimes he can dye those books into different colors, so it's red or sometimes blue. And then Jeon Kwang-young also put the old books on the side of the canvas. And did you notice that Mr. Ham does the same thing? If you look at carefully, actually on the side of the canvas, the sides were actually wrapped with old books as well. So it's all over the canvas. And Mr. Ham, for example, he built many layers of hanji in order to come up with finer completion. Another important artist who's using hanji, in my mind, is photographer Lee Jung-jin. So she's very unique in using hanji as a medium to print photographic images. As you know, you are digital, like a printer of photography. You buy like that a little bit of, how do you call it, glossy or matte photo paper, right? Specialized photo paper. But hanji actually doesn't have any of those chemicals on it, so it's very hard to imprint photographic images on the paper. So Lee Jung-jin, the photographer, she goes to the dark room, and then she's going to put the chemical solution on hanji. And then when it is well observed, she's going to imprint her photographic images on it. And if you know the process of black and white photographs, Lee Jung-jin's process is very rigorous and laborious, and that's why her works is very well appreciated. So she uses the traditional motif, as you can see here, the tools, all the tools, and then create photographic work. So I sometimes wonder if you have to get old books, where can you get hold of old books? You can still go to the auction, Seoul auction. They have this collection of traditional books. But on the other hand, you may wonder if I get the old book and tear off those sheets and then use it for artwork, then what about the the legacy, or what about the preservation of artworks? Old books, people say you have to preserve in the museums or in the collections. But still, you can buy a lot of old books in this kind of Hwanghakdong flea market. Sometimes in Insadong, but Insadong deals with really high level antiquarian objects. But people sometimes come out to sell their old books, like something in the attic, and we don't use it, we don't read it. So what shall we do? But anyhow, in Mr. Ham's works, overall, colors are a little bit, how do you call it? confined to certain basic colors. And I see a lot of traditional motif in Korean history, such as like 5 major colors, like 오방색, or sometimes like I see a lot of 색동, like the rainbow colors that you see in children's clothes. So he created those unique aesthetics of Korean tradition, but yet the format, it looks like usually abstract painting on a large canvas, are very appealing to non-Korean viewers as well. So I think that's why his work had a little bit of cultural originality as well as universality to a wider audience. His works are usually entitled as a daydream or one's hometown, as you noticed it. So I think he has a lot of nostalgia for old times when things are more peaceful or things are more, how can I say it, less interrupted. So this kind of nostalgia for hometown or old times, these are sort of ongoing theme of his work. So relation to the disappearing tradition, as you can see in this Namjoon Paik's shamanistic performance in the backyard of Hyundai Gallery in 1999, Korean people always went through rapid industrialization, especially 80s, even 90s. So they had a little bit of anxiety over lost traditions or things that are lost. So you can see a lot of those movement toward history or toward your own hometown, sort of innocent childhood, those things. So here it's one's hometown. And I don't know how you perceive these things, but to me, predominantly like a brownish wall that we may see, sort of like a chogat집, like a thatched roof house for ordinary people. And then you have some darker browns all over. And then underneath, you have those collage of Chinese characters underneath. So when I see these lines, so this is actually twisted Hanji rope that is glued on top of the canvas. It looks very much like a calligraphic brushwork. If you see the reproductions, actually it's not like a rope which has a little bit of texture. It's more like a painted or dribbled brushwork. So that type of black lines all over the paintings can be seen as calligraphic lines, but at the same time, like a tree branches, as you see in Kim Hwan-gi's Jar and Plum. I am not saying that Mr. Ham was very inspired by Kim Hwan-gi. I have to ask him how he thinks of Kim Hwan-gi. But what I want to emphasize is there is a certain undertoned nostalgia for the cultural heritage or something that's missing. So here you see the full moons in different colors, and then the moon jar or 달 항아리 along with sort of a peach blossom twigs. And then some of compositions in Mr. Ham's work, like this here, Daydream, made in 2017, also reminds me a little bit of semi-abstract or semi-figurative paintings of Kim Hwan-gi. But I'm not saying that I am not emphasizing like Kim Hwan-gi's influence on Hansop. I'm more interested in this ongoing theme about the tradition and innovation. So the kind of colors that he uses a lot, like red, and then green, blue, and then a little bit of yellow, and those type of like a green, for example, it's not really green leaf green, sort of a sepia green, those kind of colors. I think it's related to Minhwa, and that's what other art critics also interpret Mr. Ham's work. It touches upon the tradition of folk painting from the late Joseon dynasty. So Hansop's, Mr. Ham's Daydream, this is a canvas, and as if there are tree branches scattered on the canvas, all the mountains, and you have dark black lines, but these are all composed of different aspects of Hanji material. So when it comes to this kind of arrangement of hanji, twisted, tied like a thread or spread like a calligraphy, it also reminds me of the traditional quilt work called bojagi, like a wrapping cloth. So traditionally, people always wanted to put together those scraps of papers or scraps of cloth in order to create a larger whole. So that's also ongoing motif in Mr. Ham's work. So he emphasized a lot of like textures, like a matière on the canvas. So when I contemplate on this textuality, like or the sensual, how do you call it, like a tactile stimulation of his work, we can also refer to this mid-20th century modernist artist, like Zhang Dubuffet, around the 1950s across Europe. Also in North America, a lot of artists worked with different material. They sometimes mixed sand with oil. In this case, Zhang Dubuffet used mezzanite. Mezzanite is your architecture, how do you call it, interior design material, sort of a composite wooden panel in order to create those kind of very rough and interrupted surface. So in a way, Mr. Ham's abstract painting is related. And also when it comes to texture, we cannot forget Park Soo-gun. Actually, both Park Soo-gun and Mr. Ham came from Gangwon-do. So Mr. Ham actually serves as an advisor on the board of Park Soo-gun Museum. So here, Park Soo-gun's oil painting on canvas. Again, he put very thick oil painting on the surface, and he scratched out in order to create this type of surface. So as if painted with dirt or painted with rough materials. And then images look behind those layers of screens. And then Park Soo-gun also signs his name with the Korean alphabet, Soo-gun. And did you notice that Mr. Ham also signs his name like a Hamsup in Korean alphabet. So when we talk about the abstract painting in Korean modern art, we cannot forget the informal movement. Around the 1950s, in the late 1950s, a group of young artists at the time, like Mr. Park Seo-bo was very young at the time, so they wanted to break from the tradition. So they started informal movement, something abstract paintings. So this work is from 1958, and Mr. Ham went to Hongik University in 1960s. So Mr. Ham was very much inspired by this movement of new art using abstract motifs. So eventually, from the 1980s, Hamsup created those unique abstract forms, visual vocabulary with traditional material of Hanji. So it's very modern, but at the same time, it's very traditional and nostalgic. So this is another daydream, and actually basically here, in the upper part, these are actually raw fibers of daknamu, and he just pasted over. And I don't know whether you saw observed the surface of the painting, but he used a lot of glue, so everything pasted really well. Like a Hanji, actually, if you paste it together with ordinary glues, they sometimes peels off. But somehow, with many years of practice, everything glued really well. But when I see this type of color materials composed with sort of all the fibers of daknamu, I am reminded of this rapid development in South Korea, especially 70s and 80s. Basically, when you get up in the morning, there is a new building, like next door, or after a week, there is a new road, or I don't know about your experience, but when I was going to school in the 80s, basically I had to walk next to subway construction site. Like the road was always yellow, always something being built. So people like Ham or his generations who were born in early 1940s, they have nostalgia for uninterrupted, undisturbed hometown like this. So you see the Seoul 1966, where the streetcar is moving and the houses are very small and run down, versus if you see next, that is Seoul Express bus terminal, the Gosok bus terminal in Pampo. The preservation of crafts work is very important, but as you can see in the 70s and 80s, there is no agricultural field to be preserved. Sort of a village ecosystem was very much destroyed or not preserved. If you see this picture of school children putting the written paper into the water, this is actually one step of recycling Hanji paper. So this is called secho. Secho means washing, the first draft. So this is the first draft of the Royal Chronicle, the Annals of Joseon Dynasty. So usually, because the first draft can have a sort of irrelevant or inappropriate material, they are not going to preserve it for a long time. They are going to put only the proper things into the second draft. Here you are going to put it in, so the paper will have a little bit of blotches of ink, but then you can reuse it for other purposes. So you don't waste anything. The same thing with the clothes. You are not going to throw away the clothes. You are going to recycle. So if you see the map, the paper making is actually specialized for Jeonju. As you can see here, Jeonju. On the south, and then the Mungyong in Gyeongsang province was also famous for paper making, and then Gyeonggi province, Gapyeong, is famous for paper making, and Wonju. Actually, these days, Wonju has a specialized program for Hanji festivals. So, coming to a conclusion, I'd like to propose the idea of a sustainable community in pre-modern society, like creating Hanji paper or like weaving your own clothes. It was part of your communal life. It's very hard to find those sustainable community not interrupted. But for example, Andong, like a Hahue village. So this is sort of an ideal model for uninterrupted, sustainable community. So everything goes back. And then you start a new cycle of production and consumption, and then you will repeat it next year. There is no waste, and then self-sustainable. But I mean, of course, there is a specialized crafts. Your region may be very good for furniture making, not for paper making. But basically, people knew or respected those craft making techniques. So this is my last slide. Gangwon province. Hamsup, Mr. Ham, has his own studio in Chunchon. Here, Hamsup, Hanji Art Studio. He creates his work in that region, Chunchon. So Chunchon promotes their creative figures. So Kim Yoo-jung, he was a novelist. Hamsup's studio is right next to Kim Yoo-jung's literature village. And then away from Chunchon, Park Soo-gun also has a museum in that rural area, like along with the mountains. And then Wonju in Gangwon province, they have Hanji festivals. These days, Korean traditional techniques or crafts traditions were very much celebrated in order to develop their own like regional festivals or regional pride and those things. So that's my last slide. We can continue our conversation in the gallery and in front of works if you want. But before we conclude this gallery talk, shall we have a little bit of a Q&A or like a time for conversation? I don't have answers for all. I want to ask to Mr. Ham, but we can somehow continue our conversation.
Any
Yes.
questions? Raise your hand.
Wanted to know how expensive are the Hanji papers?
Hanji paper these days, it's quite expensive. I mean, somebody can fill me in, but the how do you call it? Korean traditional ink and brush painters. I ask, how do you procure your supplies? And they say they put advance order to some of the masters that you see over here, like Chang Yong-hoon or Shin Se-jung, and then next year they will say, well, this year I can only provide 1,000 sheets of Hanji. Depending on the year, your crops are not always consistent, so they put advance order. And here it's hard to get good Hanji paper. If you go to Korea, like Insadong, like in near the Gyeongbokgung Palace, there are a lot of art supply stores, but like a special artist, they usually have their own place. Like Amy Lee, I actually showed a little bit of video created by Amy Lee. Amy Lee is a Korean-American artist living in Columbus, Ohio. And she was very inspired by Hanji making process. So she spent a few years in Korea. And then now she has a website to supply like a good quality Hanji paper made in her own farm. If you go to Columbus, Ohio, you can actually find that hot iron, like a plate for dochim, right, in order to, heat dry your Hanji. She actually built that machine. So there are places like those you can visit when you harvest the 당나무. Any other comments? Well, maybe I disappointed you too much with like a lot of historical materials about Hanji, but there are a lot of materials. And is Peter in the office? Could you show me the bamboo canvas website? I don't know how many of you know me, but I teach history of art to art and design students mainly. So I taught at Pratt Institute for 10 years, for example. Now I am teaching at Fashion Institute of Technology, and most of my students want to make things by hand. So I was explaining how to create Hanji paper. So you get the trees, strip off the bark, but it was not very effective. So I created a website called bamboocanvas.org. So you can find a lot of videos for all kinds of Asian techniques. And I am not partial to Korea, so I included techniques for Japanese art and Chinese art as well. So Hanji is very unique material, but China or Japan, they also create their own fiber-based paper, and it's good quality. But dochim, as I mentioned earlier, that is particular to Korean tradition. That's why in Joseon Dynasty, Chinese government always wanted to have those dochim paper from Korea. That's why it's called Hanji. When you say Hanji, the Han is like a Korean, like a Han. So that's very unique. What else? When you dye Hanji paper, of course, you can dye on a produced Hanji, but if you see these intangible cultural property masters, they actually dye the pulp, the tree barks. If you want to make a yellow paper, they actually dye that bark, and then make sort of a pulp type of yellow water, and then they create yellow paper. That's more authentic and more laborious, I would say. But you can also dye your like a given Hanji paper, and then when you treat the tree bark, you really have to carve the outside darker brown. If you don't do it, the paper is impure, so that you can sometimes see paper is a little bit opaque, or it has a lot of brown dots in it. So you can use those rough papers for certain purposes. But for ink and brush painting, the white, smooth, ivory Hanji paper, you really have to peel the bark really well without any impurities, and then you are going to make paper. But the technique is very important. It's not easy. And you can try a lot of paper making workshops in Korea. Jeonju is a very fun place to visit for those. Yes.
Could you tell us a little bit more about some of the most important applications of Hanji in a modern society?
Application of Hanji, how you use Hanji. So you can use it for, as a substitute for windows. Like if you have a door, like a sliding doors, you are going to put the Hanji. So it lets humidities, and then it also has a little bit of light, soft light coming into the indoor. So that's one thing. And then when you make a clothes, especially winter clothes or the armor in Joseon Dynasty, they always put a little bit of padded paper inside, so that maybe the spear doesn't go through the Hanji. So when it comes to clothing, it's always important. And you can also coat with a little bit of perilla oil, like a 들기름, 들기름, like it's a sort of a sesame, but it's more like a wild sesame. So you are going to coat Hanji with those, like a little coat of oil. Then it's not water permeable, so that you can use for either like a lantern, like to make lanterns, or other types of tools. Sometimes. How do you call it? Raincoat. You can also coat your papers with oil. And then what else? You can create the jisung, like the rope, and then create the vessels and other things. So basically, you don't throw away any scrap of it. Yes. What kind of glue? Well, I mean, the house painters, right? They use the rice glue. Like you can create sort of a porridge type of, like a little glue. But then there are other more like animal-based glues too. I don't know so much about the Hanji, but other crafts, they can use rabbit glues, like a sort of a, yeah. But it's created by cooking either rabbits or animals. Then you have that, the gelatin, type of material. So that's also used as a glue. But I don't know which varnish Mr. Ham used. I want to ask him. Right. That's why he says it's a Hanji and mixed media. So when it comes to mixed media, I'm not so sure what that mixed media is, but it's a little bit shiny, right? And then it's very hard on the surface. So I don't know what kind of material he applied on the surface. So we can continuously talk. There are some people who have met Mr. Ham, so we can ask them. So we can continue our Q&A, but it's 7:20. So shall we conclude our talk? And then just casually hang out. Thank you so much for listening attentively. And I don't know whether I delivered the superiority of Hanji to you very well or not. But visit bamboocanvas.org. It's a great website. Thank you.